Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, all of you. Hopefully, all of you are staying safe and healthy in these unusual times. I am Suresh Madhuvasu. I am founding partner from Product 10X. We're a startup accelerator based out of San Francisco Bay Area, and I'm super excited to talk to you today. And thanks for the opportunity from Future of SaaS. Today's topic is very special and not many people really talk about it. And what we have really done is, as a startup accelerator, we have luckily this vantage point to really observe a lot of these startups, quite successful, some struggling, and then some did not make it to be a successful startup. So that is really where we looked at the startups that are struggling and that did not make. And we are presenting you today the aspects of the findings that we have from these startups, and then what our recommendation is from the SaaS enterprise startups point of view. Let's dive in. So we are, again, as Product 10X Startup Accelerator out of San Francisco Bay Area. We essentially co-create enterprise SaaS startups with a focus on deep tech as well as the product-led growth. I'm sure many of you are super familiar with the whole idea of AI, ML, automation in general, the chatbot, the conversational AI aspect of it, and then the whole of blockchain is actually disrupting many, many industries, and especially the traditional industries that at some point of time when we said there is no growth and then the technology adoption is super slow, that's really where the deep tech is really disrupting a lot of the thinking from the innovation standpoint, and we really help companies to really get there. And to sort of take a step back, and then this is actually a great research that is given by the Startup Genome Project, where they really looked at the startups that have some kind of mentorship. We'll briefly talk about what that mentorship means. And some of the startups where the founders did not have any help, which is basically to say 90% of startups unfortunately fail. And it takes longer for some of these founders to validate because they are trying many things hastily. And that's really where we absolutely want to avoid, right? I mean, there is definitely a method to the madness when we want to validate the product in the market. And then the last one is, of course, innovation for the sake of innovation is definitely not what we want, especially in the startup lifecycle. So, but then what we essentially come to terms with is saying, hey, when you have the right mentorship, there is a good chance that the startup success will increase, the chance of startup success. And especially in the SaaS-oriented startups, there is a 3.5x user growth, as well as 7 times chance of the capital raise when you have the right mentorship. And now let's dig a little deep into what we mean by mentorship, right? It could be anywhere related to VC's funding, angels funding the startup, or they are being really there on whether the strategic or operational roles along with these SaaS founders, or you have the advisory that is coming out of the industry experts, people who have been there, done that, or from accelerators, incubators. There is variety of spectrum that you have in the startup world that we absolutely feel all these founders and startups should take advantage of. And with that, what we will do is to really look into what we have done in the last couple of years, and then look into some of these findings. To really bring everything in a summary, we have actually looked into 120 plus startups in the last 18 months. And we were super surprised that the 2020, which is supposed to be a very devastating from the startup fundraise point of view for the net new startups. Many startups still did very, very well, right? So some of them actually came into the business in 2020, and then some of the startups which were about to get checks, I think, that fell in. But of course, we all know that many startups couldn't really raise funds, so they had to really do creative things to pivot to the next levels. So our learnings are really from some of these 120 startups that we have analyzed and learned from, where they really went across continents and countries for sure. And the most important thing for us is, for the whole of the pre-COVID and during the COVID, we have definitely seen the industry trend where a lot of these e-learning and education technology companies have come up. And many of them have different spectrums, right? I mean, there are some e-learning edutech companies that are focusing on the content creation, and some are focusing on a lot of LMS kind of capabilities. But whatever it is, one of the primary trend that we have seen is a lot of startups are innovating how we learn, and that is super essential and critical for us, because gone are the days where for us to understand one concept, we're going on to a particular learning system or YouTube or looking at the textbooks and reading for hours and hours. But there is a lot of value because people learn differently. And then that is really where all these startups are coming to provide that whole aspect of e-learning and education technology in general. And going forward, we have a lot of startups that we have seen in collaboration and productivity tools. Think of it from a wide range of spectrum, anywhere from project management tools, task management tools, and as well as some of these companies who are really trying to provide a lot of infrastructure for remote work. And that's a fair thing. And especially we have seen a lot of companies that are coming or accelerating in the digital health, because especially during the COVID point of view, telehealth and telemedicine has only improved. And especially the second category that we saw in the digital health was the whole of the mental health startups were definitely on the high. And then the last couple of industries that we have definitely looked into was the predictive analytics. Predictive analytics, of course, is much more of a horizontal technology space, but can be applied in multiple verticals. And then the whole of the talent management, DevOps, and others. So as you see, all these different startups have completely very different variables in terms of where they are coming from, what industry they are. And of course, we have seen startups from idea stage all the way to Series A. Now, without further ado, what we have done is to really categorize all the findings that we have from the startups into 4 distinct categories. Now let's look at very broad spectrum of what does it really mean by startup structure, and then does it really make sense to really look into some of these nuances of startup structure and what we found there. So the finding one is to really say that based on who are the founders of the startups, sometimes it is solo founders, sometimes it's a team of the founders, but irrespective, we have found that some of these startups either go lean on the business front, where founders are really coming from industry. They have worked in a particular industry for 10, 15, 20 years, whatever, and then they found a problem in the industry that they can solve using technology. And in those cases, we definitely found that these founders underestimate the product needs. And what it meant really was to say they think technology is magic, and which means we can bring in product in the next 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever. but then they get really upset because they understood the technology can be super fast, but then that's not happening in reality. So that's really where we really found some business oriented founders need to better understand the whole technology and the product velocity in general, which is, of course, the exactly opposite, where some of these tech founders, they overestimate the product, and then they think product is the solution for everything that is there. And then they focus less on marketing and sales, unfortunately, and they realize that, oh, I have built a great product, but then nobody is liking it, or people don't even know about my product. So this is really where we have seen two different kinds of founders at extremely two different spectrums. Number two, for us, it's really about a lot of these startups from the SaaS point of view, whether it is about cloud or SaaS services, whatever that initial set of products or the companies that these founders are doing, they always have this mindset of, okay, I mean, I have learned something from consulting or doing these services for these enterprises. Now I see a very clear need in the market. So why not I take that services or consulting experience and then make it as a product? While that's a great way to bring in and then start an enterprise SaaS startup, but the product mindset and the product maturity is something that many of these founders underestimate, and then they still apply the same philosophy of a project where there is a start date, there is an end date, and then there is a clear set of requirements for us to really execute. But of course, I mean, as a product company, as an enterprise SaaS company, that's not true. I mean, it's very difficult to really get that initial set of idea validated and to really understand that there is a problem out there in the market and your product should help solve that problem in a much more generic way. And now the finding three for us is really about part-time founders with no accountability. And this is very often the case where some founders, when they start the company, when they are full-time working with some company, they have a day job, and then they are super passionate about solving a problem. So a bunch of nice founders come together and then they start something. But what happens is one or all of them, unfortunately in timeline, they lose interest or life happens, and then they sort of go off the track and there is no progress. I mean, sometimes initially you have nice UX designs that you have, and then over the next 6 months, people are still talking about the UX designs, but there is no product. Or even after 1 year, there is no product. And that's really where we found it's super critical and important for such founders to really make sure that they are splitting the responsibility and accountability in a equal distribution fashion across all the founders, and make sure that they are going on specific tasks and strategic direction and making sure that their goals are met in the timeline. And now coming to some of the startups who are in the pre-product stage, our findings are really like, some of these founders are super passionate, and then they are like, have this great idea. And then when we ask them like, okay, how did you validate the idea? Why do you think that is a real problem? And then when we dig much deeper, what we realize is the problem is there for sure, but they have validated the idea from their family and friends. While that is not a bad idea, but what happens is in time, these friends and family are not the ones who are actually going to probably pay and use your product. And that's really where a big challenge comes through. That founders think that, yes, we have validated the idea, we have really going to start the product, but then after that they realize that, oh, nobody's liking my product because the initial set of users that you went and tested this idea are not the real users. Next finding is really prototype is not a product. As fundamentally simple as it sounds, many founders think they have a UX design, sometimes even PowerPoint designs, and then they think, yes, I have a great product, and then now I'm ready to go. But what they pretty much underestimate is, in prototypes, you can do anything that we want, but for a particular product to work, whether it is enterprise software, hardware, a mix of whatever SaaS product that we have, but it takes a good amount of time for us to validate, build, and then take it to the market. And pretty often, the founders mistake the initial prototypes that they have with actual product, and they unfortunately fail miserably because they think this prototype should work for the initial set of customers, which it won't. And now these are set of the startups where think about their product is done. Somehow they assume that they have validated the idea, they have product designs, and then they have a initial MVP, and they are about to go to the sales. So what we have seen in these particular kind of companies is many founders say, hey, I have built a great product and it's all about sales. While that is true from the founder's point of view, the term great product becomes very subjective at that point of time, because a product, whether it is great or not, is to be judged by the users, the buyers, and not by the people who created the product. Of course, we should be proud of the product that we built, but whether that product is usable and useful is something that the users have to define. And that's really where many founders really get into problems when some of these sales leaders or sales reps come in, and then they have no idea what the product is about. They learn it, but then they fail to really take it to the market because the product initially is not built using some of the early adopter users in mind. And in the same one, in the pre-sales one, minimum viable product is not the same as product market fit, right? Just because we released the MVP doesn't mean that we have achieved product market fit. Or even sometimes, just because we have taken an MVP and then showed it to a couple of our family friends, and then they said it is great, doesn't mean that we have achieved product market fit. And this is something that many founders learn it the hard way, where they are super happy about the MVP, but then they think just because it is MVP, it is already accepted in the market, which is again not true. And now let's look at some of the findings that we have from post-sales. And of course, as you can imagine, these are the startups that are absolutely, they have a product and then they are doing some sales, and whether it is consistent sales or not, it's a different question. But the idea really is these startups actually have a good sales month over month, right? So, and again, some of them where we realize that many companies fail at this stage is because they realize that just because they have 5, 10, 15 customers doesn't again necessarily mean that they have achieved the product market fit. I mean, there are many ways, of course, there are a bunch of articles and theories behind when do we consider a particular startup / product achieved a product market fit. But for the purpose of today, what we are really looking at is if we are able to bring in a repeatable customer and prospect conversions, the customer sales and everything, that is typically when we would realize that, yes, I mean, the product has a value. More and more number of customers are looking for it. They find it useful. And especially in the SaaS world, they are actually renewing without too much of a pushback or negative feeling, right? So the reason why this is super important sometimes is many of the founders think, I have some customers, so now I have achieved the product market fit, so my company now is valued 5x, 10x, whatever. And unfortunately, that's not true, because unless you really bring in that repeatable processes from the product, the sales, the marketing, and the go-to-market aspect of it, just because we have some customers not necessarily mean that we have the product market fit. And this is actually a very critical aspect that we've realized with the startups that are post-sales. And what this means is, let's take an example of, there is one particular product that we are selling, and founders typically think, oh, if I have more revenue, that means I will be more valuable, and the one way to get more revenue is to build more products. And unfortunately, it doesn't really turn out that way, because especially even after the post sales, the resources that you have are limited, they are constrained like any other company. And the more you stretch out as a founder to build multiple revenue sources, think of it really as you are putting more strain on the product development, product, and then the sales, and in general, the whole of the organizational resources. So, and then this only causes more confusion within the product, sales, and the marketing, and even with the customers, because that's not really the time when the customers are really looking for upsell and cross-sell with multiple products, right? So that's one thing that we would definitely advise to avoid in those stages. The last one on this topic is, especially in some of these companies, we had no idea who is prioritizing the product. Customers are prioritizing the product, sales is prioritizing it, the product is actually getting filled in the pipeline from the founders, the CEO, CTO, and then multiple people. And that's absolutely a recipe for disaster, because at any point of time, the product priorities and what is the product roadmap has to be generally thought through by each and every leadership team in the organization. And especially for the startups, and time is the enemy. And that's really where we would definitely advise one person who is the head of the product, or the CEOs themselves sometimes, to be completely responsible for the prioritization and the roadmap, especially in the initial stages. With that, we will come to our recommendation to really avoid these kind of pitfalls. And we absolutely want more and more founders to be successful, and that's really our mission. So from that angle, we would want the founders and the CEO of the company to really look at the holistic view of the startup journey, and not just look at what is needed today. It's a pretty difficult ask from the founders, but remember that that is really what makes a successful startup versus a struggling or a failed startup, where the founders are really looking at the journey as a continuum, and not just as, I want to build a product today, I want to have one sale, or I want to bring in one customer. That's really not the point. Really look at how do we really validate the idea, looking at the product strategy and the whole aspect of the roles and organization within the company, and how do we really take this product from the idea stage to the product stage to the whole customer journey, right? So these are the kind of things that we would absolutely want founders to be mindful of when they're executing, and then have the right partners and advisors to really bring this knowledge together. And our second and final recommendation is, there is, for a lot of decades of the on-premise products, we have definitely seen either the sales-led strategy or the marketing-led strategy for sure. And with the recent cloud and SaaS-based approach, what we are seeing is there is a lot of aggregation and the push for the bottom-up strategy, where the actual users are adopting the product, and then they are asking their organization leaders to really bring those the tools and products into the company. So that's really where we absolutely believe that product-led strategy is something that the SaaS company should adopt, and make sure that we are bringing in the right resources from outside in approach, which is really to say, think about what is the industry, what are the trends, and what are the driving factors. Make sure that we understand the industry trends, and then also think through who your competition is, and then what kind of talent that you need to make your journey successful, and then really go through your internal processes to get to a winning product, and then take that product-led approach from building the product for the right users, solving the right problems, and then take it to the market. And this is really where we think the next generation startups from the SaaS point of view will be super successful when they take in the product-led journey. With that, I would say thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, and hope these insights are super helpful for you. And if you are a founder really creating the next generation SaaS startup, please do be mindful of these insights, and super happy to talk to you further. Thank you, everyone. Again, I wish you all stay safe and have a good day. Thank you.